Hello everybody, it's me and I am back again. I just wanted to do a kind of sit down, chatty, monthly review, I guess, of bookish things. But I'm not entirely sure they're all going to be particularly bookish. I just wanted to catch you all up on what's been going on this month, have a little chat, talk about some of my reading, which hasn't been exactly great, and yeah, just the usual stuff, I guess. So, I don't know if you can see, but since the last video, which was a month ago, I have moved flats. So I'm now in a different flat. So the start of January was all about moving into a new flat and finishing up the module from the semester before, and starting my new module, but I only have one module this year, and that's my master's thesis. So I've been working hard on that. My reading, as I have said already, hasn't been exactly great, but that's mostly because I've been like randomly really busy without really knowing why or how that happened, because I'm not much of a busybody sort of person, and then B, because I'm doing lots of additional like academic and sometimes quite heavy theoretical reading, I suppose, which isn't the most facilitating for reading for pleasure, because I don't want to then come home and read more, even if it's something completely different. My mind's just a bit like, meh, let's not do this. But it's been fun. I've been doing lots of interesting reading. I think the start of like the month, my reading focus was on this theory of the semiosphere by Juri Lotman. He's an Estonian semiotician. So he studies, or he was writing about semiotics, and he sort of was looking at the semiotics of language, and he developed this theory of the semiosphere, in which it's like a biosphere. I think that's the sort of scientific thing that kind of inspired him. So the biosphere is like how everything can exist within this particular sphere and things happen, and but he's looking at it from a semiotic perspective, in which semiosis appears within this particular semiosphere. There's lots of flaws to it, which makes it an interesting thing, because obviously I believe there's the Tartu school in Estonia, which still quite value this theory, but it's difficult to see it used elsewhere and in different sort of aspects. But I used it in my essay, and try to rework it a little bit to fit into my interests, and it's fun to work with things like that. And then like now, I guess I've been focusing on this book that I'm reading at the moment called The World Republic of Letters by Pascale Casanova. She is a French literary critic and professor of comparative literature, I believe. Unfortunately, she passed away 2018. And this book is about world literature, and how there are systems in place in which literature exists within this world republic of letters, and within that there are, of course, hierarchies and things. It's a really interesting book. However, there is like glaring issues with it. One of the things is that she's French, and it's a very Eurocentric perspective that she has taken on this concept of world literature, and she firmly believes that Paris is like the center of world literature and whatnot. And she confronts this in her book, where she says, I know as a French person this might just feel like navel gazing, because I'm only talking about France and I'm focusing on Paris instead of everything, but she's studying it from like a historic perspective, and she's like, I'm not the one that's choosing to focus on France, history is telling me to focus on France. And it's like, okay, fine, but you are also the one who is choosing to focus on specific historical documents, which, you know, you're going to be biased within that. So it's as if, according to her, Asian and African literature only existed post-colonialist times, and it's just a bit odd that she would say things like this. So, and also, she's talking about all of these, like, you know, books and authors and everything. And I'm only, like, 175 pages in, so I'm, like, nearly halfway. And I don't think she's mentioned a single female author. And so it's kind of like the text I'm going to read before reading these books. So I'm going to read Against World Literature on the Politics of Untranslatability by Emily Apter, and then I'm going to read An Ecology of World Literature from Antiquity to the Present Day by Alexander Beecroft. Now these are both verso books. I got these for Christmas from my dad, and obviously one's like An Ecology of World Literature, whilst the other is Against World Literature. And these are sort of themes that are running through my thesis, my master's thesis. At the moment, I'm working on gathering data about translated fiction and cultural dissemination and cultural mediation through that. I guess at the moment, it's kind of looking more now at the perspective of the translator within this process. So these texts are kind of like helpful, and I'm hoping to align these theories with Juri Lotman's semiosphere in various different ways. Within my thesis, however, you know, it's all subject to change because I'm still in a data collection process, and still reading lots of different theories and articles and whatnot. So my thesis might look very different 3 or 4 months down the line than it is looking now. So, you know, those are the books that I've like been focusing on for a while. But I have also been reading other books. I would do these in the order that I read them, but maybe I'm not entirely sure what that order is. So I'm just going to do it the order I have them here. The first one is The Crossed Out Notebook by Nicolás Giacobone. It's translated by Megan McDowell, and I feel so sorry for this translator who had to deal with this book. This is like one of the worst books I think I've ever read, and it made me so angry to the point where I had to post a review on Goodreads. It was just really disgusting, and I literally have 0 shits that I could spare for Nicolás Giacobone. He can wither and perish in invisibility in the field of literature because he doesn't deserve to be known. I do not recommend that book to anyone, unless you just kind of want to be angry, or unless you're like a 40, 50-year-old man who doesn't care about anyone or anything in our society at the moment. And then the next book that I read, Man Tiger by Eka Kurniawan. This is translated by Labadali Sembering. The book itself is from Indonesia and set in Indonesia, and it is a really interesting story about a murder has happened, and we know from the very start who did it, and we know that there's like something a little bit odd about it, and then we just sort of explore these few characters and these 2 families in particular, and we're flitting through time and space also, like we go through different places to understand like the context behind this. And there's lots of really interesting spirituality aspects to it, beliefs in cultural beliefs that kind of help to push the narrative that happens. I really enjoyed this. I think that at times it was a little bit too slow and a little bit too wishy-washy, where you kind of would like lose touch with the book and what it was trying to say. But I still gave it a 4.5 because I still really liked it, and yeah, it developed really well, and there were moments of real beauty in the text. And then I read Moth to a Flame by Stig Dagerman, which is a funny name, translated by Benjamin Mia Cruz, and this is a Swedish book. It's part of the Penguin Vikings European Writers series. And I've read all of the other books except for the German one, which, I don't know, there's something about German literature that for some reason, I'm just like, oh, maybe I'll wait until I read that. A Moth to a Flame is about a young man whose mum dies, and then he learns that his dad had been having an affair and is planning on marrying this woman that he'd been having an affair with. This book was probably longer than it should have been. I think it could have been cut down a bit too much. I really loved it at the start, and then I got really bored in the middle, and then just maybe like the final part, I was a bit like excited again, but not really as much, because I think the middle bit was just so long and laborious and dull. It didn't feel very Swedish, like, but well, it was just a little bit too dramatic at times, and I was like, yeah, okay, like, you know, give a Swede a few drinks and they might open up to you, but otherwise they're going to be very cool and collected. So like, I was just, the drama was a bit too much for me, and because it was so unnecessary sometimes too, and it just felt like this is how characters in a dramatic novel should behave. I think I've just been spoiled by Death in Spring. I think Death in Spring, like the first book of this series, was just so good, and nothing has quite been able to match it since then. And then the next book I read is Tristano by Nanni Balestrini, and this was translated by Mike Harakis. Now, this book is not really a book that you should read if you're looking for a good story, because there ultimately isn't particularly a story. The premise of this book is that this book itself is number 13,492, and every single book that's been printed of this story is different and unique. It has been written in a way that computational technology can mix up sentences and structures and parts of it to create a new story for every person who reads it. In that context, it's a really interesting experiment of literature, and what does it mean to publish books and print books and everything, and what does it mean to tell a story if you're trying to tell multiple stories, even though I think at the end of the day it is always still the same story, which is that the story of Tristan and Isolde, which I thought I knew that story, but then I read this and I was like, I don't see how it's related at all, really. I don't know, maybe it was a failed experiment, because you like it just, you know, these like memes that you get sometimes of where it's like, oh, I programmed a bot to watch every Harry Potter film and read every Harry Potter book and then write a new Harry Potter book, where it all just like nothing really makes sense, and it feels like that. It's just that's not what reading should be about. It's not, you can experiment with literature, sure, and it's probably good to experiment, but I think sometimes a story really is what drives the book's purpose. So yeah, umming and ahhing is if you're interested in like the experimentative, is that the word? The experimental aspect of it, then pick it up. But if not, I don't advise you to read it. And then actually the first book I read this year is The Book of Echoes by Rosanna and Amaka. This book is coming out, I think, end of February. It says March here, but I believe it's the end of February. It is a sort of African diaspora novel that we're seeing a lot more of, and are beginning to like, I've been beginning to notice that these African authors in diaspora are almost like creating a new style of writing in themselves, and I guess it comes a lot from the notion of ancestry and like the voices of your ancestors and stuff, because there's always like, there seems to be voices and ancestors that travel through time and space and like help narrate stories. This has that. It follows two characters, one from Nigeria, one living in the UK, and sort of just how their lives pan out and then eventually collide. There's Michael and there's Ngozi, and they're the two characters. And Ngozi's storyline I found a lot more interesting and a lot more enjoyable, whereas Michael's storyline, which was still good, maybe because it was about like the UK, it was set in the UK, he was growing up in the UK, and it was during the 80s, and it's at once very familiar but also at once very alien, because it's not like I did not grow up in this kind of world at all. the UK that I grew up in was very different. So like I think it was just this like contradiction which made it more difficult for me personally to acclimatize to almost, whereas in Ngozi's story, because it was just always so different, I don't think I was ever bored, because even though Michael's story had differences, there were moments where I was just like, okay, but yeah, this is just England or something, and I don't know how to explain it, but yeah, that's how I felt. I gave this book 4 stars. I did really enjoy it, and I recommend it when it does come out, reading it, especially if you like these kind of books. Trying to think, is there anything else I need to catch you up on? I think that's all I really have to say, actually. We'll probably see you next month, if that's the rate that my video creation is going to be going, and that is mostly just because I am busy. I'm busy, and sometimes, I don't know, when I'm busy sometimes I get a bit sad and I don't really want to make videos, and I'm also, I don't know what kind of videos I want to be making. I have ideas of what I want to be making, but they're not, I don't really, at the moment I feel like I don't have the time to match my ideas, nor do I have the motivation to come up with more feasible ideas. So at the moment I'm just kind of, yeah, if I want to make something, I'll make something that will go out, but I'm not getting too hung up on it, because I have too many other things to do. I have a bloody master's thesis to write and PhD proposals to write, so things are good in that respect, and if you ever get worried about not seeing video from me, just know that I'm probably alright, most likely. I'll see you next time for another video. Bye bye.